one person wants to keep the property and the other one wants to get
Right.
bought out.
Because if that happens,
How do we avoid that?
In the eyes of California,
Property taxes tenfolded.
it's a buyout now.
Now your property taxes are over $20,000 annually.
I spoke with many tax advisors, financial planners.
The caveat to that is
They don't even know the strategy
sibling A is like, I want my money.
without raising property taxes.
Property is likely going to get reassessed,
We just put it under Sibling's name and then be done with it.
but that's not just as simple as straightforward as you'd think.
How does one person have the cake and eat it too?
Welcome back to another episode of the SCI Mortgage Podcast, where we are here to empower those of you who are self-employed or looking to build your real estate portfolio. On today's episode, we have a very special guest with us, a very good friend of mine, Dat Win, who is also my business partner and the founder of Everyday Lending Group, and he's going to tell us how to properly access cash if you've inherited a property or additional assets within a living trust, or maybe you want to buy out someone else and keep the property. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right in here and welcome Dat to the show. I am very excited that you're here. This is officially our first episode where you and I are joining us together on the podcast. So I'm excited. I look forward to you unpacking all this great nuances of the trust pieces and, hopefully drop some knowledge on us. So welcome, brother.
Yeah, what's going on, Ryan? Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here today. So yeah, if you just kind of want to explain to those of us who are not familiar with particularly the differences of normally when you have a property, if it's just individually owned or maybe it's owned, potentially even in a corporation, but it's not that difficult to refinance that property if you can qualify. But where the challenges come in, if your clients have inherited properties that are in like a family trust where maybe, unfortunately mom or dad's passed away and, this trust has gone to the siblings. And more often than not, we see, one person wants to keep the property and the other one wants to get bought out. But that's not just as simple as straightforward as you'd think. So I'd love for you to kind of break that down, how all of that works. So Dat, what I'm also personally curious about is how does someone who's inherited a property through, a family member that was in a trust, and maybe I want to take cash out and just exit, but you want to keep the property as the other sibling, typically that's easy to do if you're just refinancing the property and taking cash out and putting it into your name. But the caveat to that is your property is likely going to get reassessed if the property that you're refinancing is located in California. And another thing is you have to make sure that you can qualify for that loan because you're essentially changing ownership, right? Like that property is in a trust and now you're going to bring it over into, an individual tenant or joint tenants, but it's no longer in that family trust. So you've got a few moving parts here and there's layers to this. So I'd love for you to kind of simplify as best as you can for us how you get from A to Z so that way, sibling A can receive the cash that they want and sibling B wants to keep that, property because it's a great performing asset and just, live off the rental income for further years to come.
Yeah. So a lot to unpack here. I would say it's probably got a couple layers. In general, let's just say sibling B wants to keep the property and he or she is the trustee. Your normal thought process is, okay, I would just do what's called a cash out refinance to buy out my sibling. And then my sibling gets paid out. And now I own the property and it's under my name. I'm good, right? That's your normal average everyone thinks the same. Even lenders, most lenders I speak with, they always go, yeah, we just put it under the sibling's name and then be done with it, right? Depending on, if, your parents or grandparents or whatever, if their property tax rate is, let's just say, very low when they first bought it, and you do it, you can do it. So what happened in California is that then it's change ownership, then it's going to change the tax rate to the current market value. So if your parents owned that home back in, I don't know, let's just say 1950, but even 1950, let's just say 1990s, right? Yeah. 1990s, and now they're taking, the tax rate of the current value today, right?
Yeah.
There's a way.
Let's just put some raw numbers on that, just so so everybody can grasp that. So let's say you bought this property for $200,000, and let's say your property tax rates are around 1%. We'll just round it off, right? So your property taxes annually are $2,000, and you've been paying on that property tax rate for years and years and years. Now, the property is appreciated and it's worth $2 million. And your sibling A is like, I want my money and you can keep the property. Great. The problem is, to Dat's point, as soon as you cash that property out and you change essentially the ownership, you're going to get that letter from the county saying, hey, we reassessed your property. Now your property taxes are over $20,000 annually. So that can make it very difficult even to qualify for the payment anymore, regardless if you'd want to make it or not, because you've increased the mortgage because you had to pay out your sibling, and now your property taxes have, tenfolded increased, right?
Exactly.
So how do we avoid that, right? Okay, so that's the problem. How does somebody avoid that when, they've inherited this property and they come to you and they're like, with the same scenario? What are the steps that they have to do and you have to do in order to facilitate that?
First step, work with the right estate planner, okay? I can't stress that enough. Knows the laws, knows how to file documents correctly, because it has to be done very particularly, okay? I spoke with many tax advisors, financial planners, and they don't even know the strategy, okay? So that's the first step. So now, how does one do it? How does one person have a cake and eat it too, right? How does sibling B put the property under their name using a loan without raising property taxes, just like we spoke about, right? How do I have my cake and eat it too? So the way we would do it, we have to do what's called private money, or hard money as they call it, okay? Because traditional lenders can't lend directly to the trust. So the applicant cannot be the trustee, because the trust has to be the one raising the money, not sibling A, not sibling B, not the parties involved. Because if that happens, then in the eyes of California, it's like, hey, you're raising your own money. It's a buyout now, right? But if the trust raised its own money and it buys the other sibling out, now it's a trust buyout, okay? So that's the reason why private money comes into play in this example. But the caveat to this is private money, of course, has a shorter term, typically 1 to 2 years, a higher interest rate, and higher fees. But the fees will all eventually balance it out. Main thing is the terms of the hard money. So as you and I both.
So just to clarify, when you're raising the money, what Dat's referring to is that's the equity in the property. So the property has to have equity. That's where this quote unquote money is coming from.
Yeah. So the qualification for hard money is it's very simple. They take a look at the equity, they take a look at the value, and then they approve it that way. Very quick. It's like cash at that point. So then if sibling B, if that's the way to do it, and then, okay, I'm going to do it that way, but what happens after? Am I stuck with that loan? Yes, right? Sibling B then inherits the property, which inherits the property's debts as well. So now that hard money is tied to the property, and also sibling B now has to pay on that. So then what's the exit strategy? So at that time, while we're doing the hard money, we're also looking at other financing options, kind of what's called another refinance or takeout loan, as we would call it, in order to pay off that private money after, okay? Now, estate planners in general typically have to outsource a hard money lender and a traditional lender. That's because typically those two lenders are separate, right? But in our case, and just because, Ryan, you and I both work in the broker world, we can do both, which was perfect for this estate planner, because he was like, perfect. I've always had a hard time trying to coordinate both, because I got to make sure the hard money lender is all good, but then I got to make sure that traditional lender knows what they're doing too, because obviously we're dealing with a lot of money, and it could be a big deal if, let's just say, the hard money goes through, and guess what? That sibling B doesn't qualify for a traditional loan to pay off that hard money. Now,
that would put them in a pickle for sure. Yeah, so very important part to qualify up front.
Yep. So that's the reason why when I told him I could do both, he was like, okay, perfect. So you can see both things at one time. That way, I don't have to worry too much about what happens after, because you already looked at the whole financial picture already. So in this case, what we did was sibling B was inheriting the property. I looked at her financial situation. Turns out she didn't qualify for a traditional mortgage, like a traditional refinance, to pay off the hard money loan. Luckily, she is a trust fund baby, right? So she had, 10 properties under her name, had rental, so that all that good stuff, right? I looked at it and I was like, okay, your credit's not so great. You don't show much on paper on your tax returns. So listen, you have all these properties that are free and clear. What we can do is we can pre-approve you for a refinance on these properties utilizing what's called a non-traditional mortgage product called DSCR. As long as those rents on those properties covers the payment on the loan that you're going to take out, you're approved. That's what we did, is we pre-approved her for that side. So once the hard money was completed and then she inherited the property and then the estate plan did what they need to do and was able to transfer it to her name and not raise property taxes, once that was done, then she signed the final documents to get funding for her takeout loan, which was the DSCR loan that we did for her, which paid off the hard money loan. Now she has a 30-year fixed on a DSCR loan, and we gave her, it was like 6.125%. It was phenomenal. So that was her exit strategy for this property, to have the cake and eat it too.
Yeah,
I know that was a lot to just kind of verbalize it, but that was exactly the case study that we did.
Yeah, and that's definitely a more of a complex scenario, to your point though,
Yeah.
because you had to go from one non-traditional loan to another non-traditional loan, and there was a lot of variables. But I'm glad that you used that example, because it just shows you the importance and how powerful the non-QM space is. Because again, the hard money is the hard money, right? To your point, those loans typically aren't cheap. They're not competitive interest rates because they're short-term loans. Like they're just, it's like a Band-Aid loan, right? But you need that loan because that's the purpose that it's used for, right? It's used for situations like this, or you're buying a property that's, in terrible shape. You fix it up, you sell it, or you refinance it into a DSCR loan using the BRRRR method. That's what those loans are there for. But traditionally, even if you utilized a hard money loan from the start and you went into a conventional, traditional conventional loan at the finish, the same concept applies. It's very important, whichever lender that you're working with, you make sure that they have qualified you for the long-term loan, essentially the loan that you're going to be left with after you've taken this cash out. Because there's been instances where that's great. You bought out this other person and you completed step one, but then you didn't get to complete step two to make yourself whole. And now you're left with essentially this, investor calling the note, right? Where, then you're getting into some very hairy situations with that asset that's yours. I mean, that's honestly like one of the biggest takeaways that I hope everybody gets from this, aside from just knowing that is the process and it is possible. And then secondly, if this property is located in California, to Dat's point, as part of Prop 19, you need to make sure that the estate planner that you're working with is knowledgeable and the loan officer that you're working with is knowledgeable. So that way you've set this up properly to avoid having that property be reassessed once you get everything all said and done. So anything else, any other big items that you think are worth mentioning when kind of structuring, a scenario like those that have like these family trusts where they're inheriting these properties and they're looking to, access cash to buy someone out?
I mean, honestly, Ryan, you already said it, right? The two biggest things, which is you got to work with the right estate plan that knows what they're doing, because it's very particular the way they have to file it in order to not get your property taxes reassessed. The other part is also a lender. You have to speak with the right lender that understands this concept, because I can tell you right now, before we did this deal and before this structure, the way I found out about the structure, I spoke with many different lenders and a few financial advisors and tax attorneys. They all said the same. They all said, just refinance it under the name. Why don't we just do that? Why don't we just do that? And I keep bringing this up and they're like, well, we never heard of that, right? And so I'm telling you right now, like, do yourself a favor. In the long run, you'll be in a better financial position doing it this way.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And, just throwing it out there, this is, if you have a situation like this, it's fairly uncommon, or, more importantly, you're going to get a lot of different answers from a lot of different people. So feel free to contact us. We're happy to kind of go over this in more detail. And, Dat works with quite a few great estate planners. So that's also, if you need any recommendations, Dat's contact info is listed so you can get in touch with them. Yeah, aside from that, any final thoughts for, the family trust, or, how to further protect yourself, when dealing with this particular type of asset?
Yeah, no final thoughts. Just remember that if you were to do this and try to do it yourself, but it has to be equal distribution, okay? So if you're inheriting a property that's $1 million, then the sibling A has to be paid out $500,000, and then sibling B has to raise $500,000 within the trust.
All right, well, there you have it. So that is how to successfully access equity in a property located in a family trust that you inherited in order to do a buyout and potentially keep the property to further help you build your real estate wealth. And for other great tools and resources available, feel free to head over to the seimortgage.com website, where we've got a lot of great tools and calculators there, ways to get in touch with us. We really appreciate you being a part of this community. Hopefully this was some beneficial information for you. And until the next time, let your income work smarter, not harder. We'll see you on the next one.